Absolutely, and I think it's very important that we do understand that there are limitations to technical analysis. For example, the Russian news is not really kicked off just yet, but we did have a statement coming out from Biden about 15 minutes ago where he said, "My sense is that Russia will invade Ukraine within the next several days." That is a direct quote from the President of the United States. So I'm not necessarily saying I agree with him, but that's what he said. So we're going to see where that goes. I think it's very important that we as traders don't freak out until we know something. But at the same time, we do know that there's FUD in the market, and we do know that people are fearful, and we do know that people are uncertain. And for some reason, there's still people in cryptocurrency that think that their money is safer in the US dollar than in Bitcoin. So I would not be surprised if the Russia news, it's not news yet, but the Russia FUD was causing a little bit of this drop. But I think it's important also that we understand that Russia and Ukraine going at it does not really have a whole lot to do with Bitcoin, because that conflict is very unlikely to escalate into anything more than what we saw with Crimea back in 2013, was it 2014? I forget exactly when Crimea was taken, but it would probably not escalate that far into a global conflict like people are worried that it will. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I don't want there to be any kind of conflict whatsoever. We're praying for peace. That's what we want. We want peace in Eastern Europe. But my point is, it's probably not going to have as big of an actual logistical impact on Bitcoin as you might think. It's just going to drive fear. So I don't think we should worry too much about it, but I also don't think it's wise for us to completely ignore it.
I wouldn't even go back. We talked about this on the show, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. And that's why I said this story's just been dragging on. I think someone in chat just mentioned the White House said this on last Wednesday as well, that they thought that the next couple of days is coming. When you look at news reports in Europe, and I would love for anyone who's in chat who lives in Europe, tell me I'm wrong or tell me I'm right. But the news in Europe continues to say they don't believe that Putin actually wants to invade. That wouldn't be good for Putin. It wouldn't be good for Europe or the United States either, but it wouldn't be good for Russia. This seems to be an American news
narrative
saying, hey, guys, we're about to see war. Whereas the people who are actually closer to the details are saying, I don't think we're going to see war. Yeah. And even what we just saw, at least what I'm seeing in the news, it doesn't even look like it was Russian troops. It looks like it was Russian separatists or Ukrainian citizens who sympathize with Russia. So that's not, that's not war. That's Ukraine attacking Ukraine. It's just Russian sympathizers are attacking Ukrainians. That's not Putin invading.
Jeb, you know what would be interesting if just super brief, just for reference, you could pull up like the Dow Jones or the S&P 500 and look at what the markets did in March of 2014 around the Crimea conflict. I'm sure there was a bit of a dip, but how long did it take to recover? Or was it more of a speculative, like fear mongering within the markets that then was a nothing burger?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're saying the Crimea conflict was in March of 2014. I couldn't remember exactly when it was. Let's look at March of 2014 here. If that's when it occurred, then that's actually pretty interesting, because there was a small dip in the S&P 500 here in March. You can see that we were sitting at 188 points over on the SPY on March 3rd. We pulled back an extreme 4% within the next 35 days. And then from there, we went on to push new all-time highs, rallying 10% in the next 100 days. So the SPY did not really have a major, did not really do a whole lot there. Now, you might argue that this is a potentially larger conflict than what happened in Crimea, and you would probably be right. But at the same time, the market being down 9% doesn't only have to do with Ukraine. It also has to do quite a bit with the global supply chain crises that are still going on. It has to do with FUD over like a fourth wave of the flu, and a lot of other things that are impacting the market, not just the Ukraine Crimea. Now, there is one thing that I'm reading here. Now, the only reason that I'm looking at CNN here is because they're the ones that seem to have that they're posting live updates. As of 5 minutes ago, CNN reports Russia expels deputy chief of mission at U.S. embassy in Moscow, which the U.S. calls an escalatory step. Russia expelled the second most senior diplomat at the U.S. embassy in Moscow without any justification in what the Biden administration views as an escalatory move, the State Department said on Thursday. So I think it's very important that we understand that there is a potential that this thing heats up. There is. And we need to be ready for that from the market standpoint. I think it's ridiculously unlikely that this turns into a global conflict or anything like some people are saying. I really don't think that's what's going to happen. Putin knows that that would end very badly for him. The best case scenario would be that it would end in the total annihilation of Russia, and I don't think he wants that. So I don't think that that's something that would escalate that far. And quite frankly, I would still be surprised if he were to go into the Ukraine, because as we talked about a second ago, as Tim mentioned, there are plenty of reasons to believe that he's not going to do that with all the sanctions that would be laid on him. He'd be kicked out of SWIFT. He would lose his ability to sell natural gas to Europe. He would lose any standing he has on the geopolitical stage. NATO's a hell of a lot stronger than Russia is, and Russia knows that. That's why they don't want Ukraine joining NATO. So the fact is, Putin is positioning as if he has chips to play, and he really doesn't. And the U.S. is taking him seriously because we should take it seriously. But everybody else in in Europe that understands what's going on. There was a minister from Belarus recently that are calling his bluff and saying, "Hey, you're not going to do anything. You're positioning because you want to look like the big dog, but it's just not going to happen." So I would really love to hear Smay's thoughts on all this. Smay, geopolitically, what do you think Russia is doing right now? Why are they positioning on the border if many different analysts in Europe are saying that they're not going to invade?
Well, to be honest with you, I there's no way to actually really know. You know what I mean? There's no way, like, we're not in those meeting rooms. We can only just kind of try to put pieces together based off of actions. And to be honest with you, I think with the way things are going right now, I think we might end up seeing some kind of conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and I think we'll probably I think there will be some kind of invasion or something, but I don't know if I agree with you guys. I don't think it's going to escalate into this massive war unless for some reason everyone just kind of loses their minds and they're like, But I don't think that's going to happen. You know what I mean? I think people are a lot smarter than that. So I think this is going to just be something that is. That comes and goes, and then next thing you know, it's going to be something else a few years from now.
I think it's also important, and I want to throw it to Tim here in just a second, but I think it's also important that we realize that Russia is not as powerful as you think it is. Now, they do have a nuclear arsenal. That much is true, but I very much doubt Putin wants to use that because he knows that NATO has one also. The whole mutually assured destruction thing didn't go away after the Cold War ended. Everybody thought that that the Soviet Union was this superpower. Let me break something down for you. The Soviet Union never had anywhere near the powerful military that the United States did. They were far behind technologically for pretty much the entire time, except for when the MiG-23 came out. That only lasted for a couple of years, and the United States and NATO caught up and surpassed it. The MiG-23 was not as advanced as people thought it was back in the 70s. The Soviet Union was spending over 25% of gross domestic product, not of tax revenue, gross domestic product on military, and they couldn't keep up with the United States, let alone the rest of NATO, when the United States was using 3 to 5% of GDP, and they had a much more strong military and army. The only reason that the Soviet Union was a threat was, one, ideologically, because there were spies going into NATO allies and into America, sowing disunity, but also because of the nuclear threat. The Soviet Union was never a threat economically to NATO as far as a war of attrition, which is the way that normally goes. The other thing I need you to understand is that Russia is nowhere near as powerful as the Soviet Union was. You look at it on a map and you say, look at this giant country. It's the biggest nation on the planet, has more surface area than the planet of Pluto. That's a true fact. Go ahead and look that up. But its gross domestic product is smaller than Italy. Why are we so worried about it? They have a large military because they spend so much of their money on it. I understand that there's a threat here, but I also want us to keep that threat in perspective. Putin is not going to use that arsenal of his. He's just not going to do it. If he does, it's going to end very badly for him, and he knows that. And if he does invade Ukraine, then what's going to happen is that he's going to basically get kicked out of every international monetary system that there is, and his entire economy will collapse, and egg will be on his face. So I'd be very surprised if he does actually invade, and if he does, it's not going to end well for him. Tim, you had something to say on that.
Yeah, well, I wanted to kind of go off of something Smay said, and Smay was 100% right. We will never know the actual details until something actually happens, because we're not in the room. We're not seeing what's happening. But there's an old fable called The Boy Who Cries Wolf.
Yep.
And what happens is when you cry wolf over and over and over and over, and there's no wolf, people stop believing you. Guess what? Someday there might be a wolf, and you cry wolf, and you're being 100% honest, but because you cried wolf so often, no one actually listened. We don't know what's going to happen, but what we do know is there's the U.S. media that cries wolf day after day after day. And so if Ukraine does get invaded by Russia, I think what's going to come out is we're going to see worldwide news say, shots fired, bombs laid, Russia invades Ukraine. I don't think we can trust U.S. media. And I
agree.
I don't think I can trust CNN. I don't think I can trust Fox. I don't think I can trust any of them. Like, they all like to make things entertaining, and that's what news has become, and they end up crying wolf. What I want to see is actual people on the ground right there actually saying what's happening, reporting it.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this video, you should definitely consider subscribing because we're trying to help you become financially free in these cryptocurrency markets. And also, consider following us on Twitter @CryptoJeb for more updates on the price of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. Peace.